Ethan Grant, a 42-year-old tech mogul, had everything, except the one thing he truly desired. When a fertility test reveals he's sterile, his world comes crashing down. But fate has a different plan. After a near-fatal accident, Amber Johnson, a poor black woman, saves his life. And when Ethan learns she's carrying his twins, his life will never be the same. Now, let's begin the story of love, redemption, and unexpected beginnings. Ethan Grant stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office on the 85th floor of Luminar Tower, gazing out at the glittering expanse of Los Angeles below. The city pulsed with life, its lights blinking like distant stars, yet none of its energy reached him. To the world, Ethan was the epitome of success, a 42-year-old tech mogul whose innovations had revolutionized industries, a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. His name graced magazine covers, and his decisions could shift markets. But tonight, as the city thrummed with vitality, Ethan felt none of it. His reflection in the glass seemed hollow, a man isolated within his empire. The shrill ring of his desk phone broke the silence, pulling him from his thoughts. He crossed the room with deliberate steps, every movement measured and precise. When he picked up the receiver, his voice was steady, composed, a voice that brokered billion-dollar deals with ease. "This is Grant," he said. "Mr. Grant, this is Dr. Harris," came the reply, calm but tinged with gravity. Ethan's heart sank, though he wouldn't have admitted it even to himself. For months, he had been undergoing a discrete series of tests, each one probing deeper into the nagging question that had plagued him since his divorce 3 years ago. Why hadn't he and Claire been able to conceive? "Go on," he urged, his tone sharp, masking his unease. There was a brief pause on the line, a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. And then the words came, irrevocable and unrelenting. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grant. The results are clear. You're sterile." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. The words hung in the air like a tangible weight, pressing down on him. He had built his life on control over his company, his reputation, his future. But this was a betrayal by his own body, a failure he couldn't fix or negotiate away. "You're certain?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the steel in his demeanor faltering. "We ran the tests multiple times," Dr. Harris said gently. "There's no doubt." Ethan turned away from the window, his hands gripping the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His mind raced, searching for an escape route, a solution. What about experimental treatments? Cutting-edge procedures? There must be something. Dr. Harris sighed, the sound heavy with finality. "Mr. Grant, I understand this is difficult to hear, but there are some things money can't buy. I recommend speaking to a counselor to process." Ethan cut him off, slamming the phone down before the doctor could finish. He stood in the oppressive silence of his office, his breathing shallow and rapid. The words echoed in his mind, "You're sterile. Money can't buy this." Control had always been Ethan's currency. He had clawed his way up from nothing, building a tech empire brick by brick, his success fueled by an unrelenting drive to shape the world to his will. But now, for the first time in decades, he faced something utterly beyond his influence. No amount of power, no sum of money, no technological breakthrough could change this truth. His mind flashed to the future he had once envisioned. A legacy of not just companies and patents, but of blood and lineage. A child who would carry his name, his ambition, his brilliance. That dream was now ashes, scattering in the wind of Dr. Harris's words. Ethan staggered to the leather armchair in the corner of his office and sank into it, his head in his hands. For the first time in years, he felt small, vulnerable, a man trapped in a fortress of his own making. The vast empire he had built suddenly felt empty, a hollow monument to a life he could no longer envision. The city lights outside continued their relentless dance, indifferent to the man staring out at them. Ethan Grant, the titan of industry, sat alone in the darkness of his office, the weight of his sterile reality threatening to crush him. Ethan Grant stormed out of Luminar Tower into the night, his mind a storm of emotions he couldn't name. The rain had started to fall, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected neon light. He ignored the chill that seeped through his tailored suit as he tossed the umbrella offered by his driver aside and slid into the driver's seat of his McLaren. He needed to feel in control of something, anything, and driving had always given him that illusion. The car roared to life, its engine growling like a caged beast. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly as he pulled onto the rain-slicked streets. The city blurred around him, a kaleidoscope of headlights and streetlights streaking past the tinted windows. But no amount of speed could outrun the words that echoed endlessly in his mind. You're sterile. There's no solution. There are things money can't buy. His chest felt tight, his breaths shallow, as if the air itself had turned against him. He had always prided himself on being unshakable, a man who could face any challenge and conquer it. But now he felt hollow, adrift in a storm of emotions he had spent decades suppressing. Anger, fear, despair, they churned inside him, each one clamoring for dominance. The rain intensified, hammering against the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. The city seemed to melt into the storm, the familiar streets distorted by the downpour. Ethan barely noticed. His hands clenched and unclenched on the wheel, his foot pressing harder on the accelerator with each passing second. The McLaren responded with a surge of power, its tires slicing through the waterlogged pavement. His mind raced even faster than the car. Memories he hadn't summoned in years surfaced unbidden. The first time he'd spoken to Claire about having children, her hopeful smile as she painted a picture of their future. The fights that followed when the tests brought no answers, the quiet devastation in her eyes the day she left, her dreams shattered by his inability to give her what she wanted most. He didn't blame her. Not anymore. The world outside blurred further, his grip on reality slipping as the emotions swelled to an unbearable crescendo. The headlights of an oncoming car snapped him back for a moment, and he jerked the wheel, narrowly avoiding a collision. His heart raced, adrenaline surging, but the near miss only pushed him deeper into the spiral. A sharp curve loomed ahead, its warning sign barely visible through the rain. Ethan's mind, so consumed with his inner turmoil, registered it a second too late. The car skidded, tires losing traction on the waterlogged road. He tried to correct the swerve, but the McLaren fishtailed wildly. The powerful vehicle suddenly a beast he couldn't tame. Panic surged as the car spun out of control, the barriers of the road rushing toward him. The screech of tires against wet asphalt was deafening, mingling with the roar of his pounding heartbeat. The impact came like a thunderclap, the front of the car crumpling against the guardrail before it flipped and skidded to a halt in the ditch. For a moment, there was silence. Broken glass settling, the hiss of steam rising from the mangled hood, and the soft patter of rain against the wreckage. Pain shot through Ethan's body as he struggled to move, his head pounding and his vision swimming. The acrid smell of gasoline filled the air, and through the cracked windshield, he saw the first flicker of flames licking at the edges of the hood. He was trapped. Panic clawed at his throat as he fumbled with the seatbelt, his movements sluggish and disoriented. The fire spread rapidly, its orange glow illuminating the rain-soaked night. Just as he felt consciousness slipping away, a shadow appeared in the chaos. A woman's face came into focus, determined, fearless, her dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. Her hands tugged at the car door, her voice muffled but urgent. He didn't have the strength to respond, barely aware of her movements as she wedged something into the door and forced it open. Her hands reached for him, pulling with surprising strength. Pain exploded in his chest as he was dragged from the wreckage, the movement jarring his battered body. The cold rain hit him like a shock, his head lolling to the side as he caught one last glimpse of the car. The flames had consumed the interior, licking at the leather seats where he had been moments ago. The woman didn't stop. She hauled him away from the burning vehicle, her determination unwavering despite the growing inferno behind them. Ethan's vision blurred further, but he could still see her eyes, steady, resolute, filled with a courage he didn't understand. "Stay with me," she shouted, her voice cutting through the haze. But the exhaustion was too much. As the world around him dissolved into darkness, Ethan's last thought wasn't of his empire, his money, or his failures. It was of the woman who had pulled him from the wreckage and the inexplicable fire in her eyes that had refused to give up on him. Ethan awoke slowly, his senses coming back to him in fragments. The sterile scent of disinfectant, the muted hum of machinery, the dull ache radiating through his battered body. As his eyes fluttered open, the harsh fluorescent light above made him squint, His throat was parched, his limbs felt heavy, and his mind was a foggy mess of fractured memories. For a moment, he lay still, disoriented, his thoughts swirling in the remnants of a nightmare. Then it hit him. The crash. The fiery wreck. The suffocating smoke. The determined eyes of the woman who had dragged him from death's grasp. His lips moved, dry and cracked. Where? Am I? He rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. A nurse appeared at his bedside, her kind face framed by wisps of gray hair escaping her neatly tied bun. "You're at St. Mary's Hospital," she said gently, adjusting the IV line in his arm. "You've been here for 2 days." Ethan blinked, his throat tightening as he processed her words. 2 days? He shifted slightly, wincing at the sharp pain that coursed through his ribs. "The accident? What happened?" "You were in a severe car crash," the nurse explained, her tone calm but laced with concern. "Your car caught fire, but someone pulled you out just in time." The memories rushed back in vivid flashes, the flames, the rain, the shadowy figure who refused to leave him behind. Who saved me?" "Amber Johnson." The nurse replied, her voice soft but firm. "She was driving home when she saw your car crash. She risked everything to get you out before the fire spread. Amber Johnson." The name echoed in Ethan's mind, unfamiliar yet somehow significant. He frowned, trying to reconcile the image of the fearless woman from the crash with the ordinary-sounding name. Is she all right?" "She's fine," the nurse reassured him with a small smile. "No injuries, though she was shaken up. She stayed with you until the paramedics arrived." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by something more complex, a mix of gratitude, confusion, and a deep, unsettling humility. A stranger had risked her life for his. Why? As the nurse fussed with his chart, Ethan's mind churned. His entire life, people had acted out of self-interest around him. He was used to transactions, to relationships built on mutual benefit or obligation. But this woman, Amber, had gained nothing from saving him. She had no reason to intervene, no stake in his survival. Her actions were selfless. "Can you get my assistant?" Ethan croaked, his voice still hoarse. "Of course," the nurse said, patting his hand gently before leaving the room. Minutes later, Victoria, his impeccably dressed assistant, swept into the room. Her usual confidence wavered as she took in the sight of her boss, bandaged, pale, and vulnerable for the first time in her memory. "Mr. Grant," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better," Ethan muttered, his trademark wit dulled by the lingering pain. He straightened slightly, wincing as his body protested. "I need you to find Amber Johnson. She saved my life, and I want her compensated." Victoria nodded, already jotting down notes on her sleek tablet. "How much are we talking? A few thousand? A car, perhaps?" "Make it 100,000, Ethan interrupted, his tone decisive. "She deserves more, but it's a start. And deliver it personally." Victoria's eyebrows shot up, but she knew better than to question him. "Understood," she said, her professional mask firmly in place. By the next day, the check was prepared, enclosed in an elegant envelope bearing the Grant Corporation insignia. Victoria tracked down Amber Johnson with her usual efficiency, finding her at a modest community center where she volunteered as a teacher for underprivileged children. Amber stood out immediately, a striking woman in her early 30s with a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from within. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were practical, worn from years of dedication to her work. She looked nothing like the corporate sharks Ethan surrounded himself with, and yet there was something about her presence that commanded respect. Victoria approached her with practiced precision, extending the envelope. "Miss Johnson, on behalf of Ethan Grant, I'd like to express his deepest gratitude for saving his life. This is a token of his appreciation." Amber took the envelope hesitantly, her brow furrowing as she glanced at Victoria. "I didn't do it for money," she said softly. "We understand," Victoria replied smoothly. "But Mr. Grant insisted. Before she could finish, Amber placed the envelope back in her hand, unopened. "Tell Mr. Grant he doesn't owe me anything." Her voice was calm but firm, her eyes unwavering. "I only did what anyone should." Victoria was stunned. Few people refused Ethan Grant's money, let alone without even considering the amount. When she relayed the news to Ethan later that evening, his reaction surprised her even more. She refused it? He asked, leaning back against the hospital pillows, his expression unreadable. Didn't even open it. Victoria confirmed. Said she didn't do it for money. Ethan fell silent, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers to the questions swirling in his mind. For a man who had spent his life believing that money could solve any problem, Amber's refusal was both baffling and strangely admirable. For the first time in years, something stirred in Ethan, a curiosity he couldn't ignore. Amber Johnson wasn't just another person passing through his life. She was different, and he intended to find out why. Ethan had never been to Compton. His life existed in a world of glass towers, luxury cars, and private jets. Yet, as his driver navigated the bustling streets of the neighborhood, a strange anticipation bubbled within him. He was here to meet Amber Johnson, the woman who had done what no one else in his life had, acted without expectation. The school was a modest brick building with a faded sign that read, Hope Valley Elementary. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the playground, a stark contrast to the sterile silence of Ethan's corporate offices. He stepped out of the car, his tailored suit and polished shoes starkly out of place against the humble surroundings. But Ethan Grant wasn't a man easily deterred by discomfort. Inside, the school hummed with life. Teachers bustled through hallways, juggling lesson plans and cheerful greetings from students. In the midst of this vibrant chaos stood Amber. She was bent over a small table, helping a boy solve a math problem, her voice calm and patient. Ethan paused, observing her from a distance. There was no pretense in her actions, no veneer of self-importance. She wore a simple cardigan over a floral dress, her hair pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail. Yet she seemed to radiate an energy that drew people in. Amber looked up, noticing him for the first time. Her eyes widened briefly in surprise before a polite smile crossed her face. Mr. Grant, she said, walking over. This is unexpected. Ethan, he corrected, offering a small, uncharacteristically genuine smile. I wanted to thank you, properly this time. Amber tilted her head, clearly amused. I thought we settled that. Not quite, he replied. How about dinner? My treat. Her brows lifted slightly in skepticism. Dinner? You can call it a bribe if it makes you feel better. Ethan said with a faint smirk. I just want to talk. No strings attached. Amber considered him for a moment, her gaze sharp and assessing. Finally, she nodded. All right, but it'll be a local spot, nothing fancy. That evening, they met at a small, family-owned diner just a few blocks from the school. The smell of sizzling burgers and fresh coffee greeted them as they stepped inside. The place was cozy, with red vinyl booths and a jukebox humming softly in the corner. Amber led him to a table by the window, and they slid into the booth opposite each other. The waitress brought the menus, but Ethan barely glanced at his. He was too focused on Amber, who studied the options like she hadn't memorized them years ago. So, Amber said, setting the menu down. What does a billionaire want to talk to a teacher about? Ethan chuckled softly, leaning back in his seat. You're not what I expected. And what did you expect? Someone who would have taken the check. Amber's laugh was warm but brief. You've built a world where money solves everything. I don't live in that world. Her words weren't accusatory, but they landed with surprising weight. Ethan shifted slightly, feeling a rare discomfort. Then what world do you live in? Amber's face softened as she leaned forward. One where kids go hungry if I don't pack extra snacks, where their parents work 2 jobs and still can't make rent, where people don't get to dream because survival takes everything they have. Her passion was palpable, her words sharp, yet filled with an aching hope. Ethan listened, captivated. In his world, people spoke in calculated sound bites, crafted to impress or manipulate. Amber spoke with a raw authenticity he hadn't encountered in years. As their food arrived, the conversation turned lighter. Amber shared stories about her students, funny anecdotes, small victories, and the challenges they faced. Ethan found himself laughing, the sound unfamiliar to his own ears. But as the evening wore on, Amber's expression grew pensive. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting slightly with her fork. There's something I should tell you, she said finally. Ethan straightened, his gaze steady. I'm listening. Amber took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. I'm pregnant, with twins. Ethan blinked, momentarily stunned. Of all the revelations he'd expected, this wasn't one of them. Congratulations, he said carefully. Thanks, she replied, though her smile was tinged with sadness. Their father? He's not in the picture. He left as soon as he found out. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could sense the pain beneath her words. She wasn't looking for pity. She was simply stating a fact. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, surprising himself with the sincerity in his tone. Amber shrugged, her composure unshaken. "I'm not. My babies are a blessing, even if they come with challenges." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Why are you telling me this?" Amber met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Because if we're going to have this conversation, you should know who I am. My life isn't glamorous or easy, and I'm not someone who fits into your world." Ethan was silent for a long moment, her words sinking in. He thought of his own life, the sterile opulence, the endless deals and power plays. For the first time, he wondered if it was his world that was broken, not hers. "I don't think you give yourself enough credit," he said finally. Amber smiled faintly, but she didn't respond. The conversation shifted again, and they lingered at the diner for hours, their words flowing like an unhurried stream. As they parted ways that night, Ethan found himself standing in the parking lot, watching Amber drive away in her beat-up sedan. He felt a strange tug in his chest, a mix of admiration, curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite name. Amber Johnson wasn't just a woman who had saved his life. She was a reminder of everything he'd forgotten: resilience, integrity, and the quiet beauty of a life lived with purpose. And for the first time in years, Ethan Grant wanted to be a part of something real. The first headline hit the morning after Ethan visited Amber's school for the second time. "Ethan Grant's unlikely companion, billionaire seen in Compton with local teacher." It wasn't the worst thing the media had written about him, but the accompanying photo, a grainy shot of him exiting Hope Valley Elementary, sent ripples through the world he inhabited. By noon, gossip blogs were ablaze with speculation. By evening, his sister Lauren was on the phone, her voice sharp with controlled fury. "Are you deliberately trying to provoke the board, Ethan?" she demanded, skipping any pretense of small talk. Ethan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose as he sat in his office. "Good evening to you too, Lauren." "This isn't a joke," she snapped. "You're being linked to a woman who, might I remind you, has no standing in our world. The board is livid. Sponsors are calling me, to ask what's going on with you." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline beyond the glass windows. "Since when do I need the board's permission to meet someone?" "Since your decisions started affecting the company's image," Lauren replied, her tone icy. "Our family's reputation is tied to Luminar Industries. Your behavior reflects on all of us. What do you think this teacher, brings to the table?" Ethan's jaw tightened. For years, he'd tolerated Lauren's controlling tendencies, understanding they came from a place of loyalty to the family legacy. But now, her words grated against the fragile balance he'd found in his life. "She saved my life," he said evenly. "That's more than most people in our world have done for me." The silence on the line was deafening before Lauren spoke again, her voice softer, but no less insistent. "You don't owe her anything, Ethan. You've already done enough by trying to compensate her. This relationship, or whatever it is, can only end badly." But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. He ended the call with a terse, "Good night, Lauren," and stared at his phone, feeling a wave of frustration and something deeper: protectiveness. Amber hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't wanted the media attention or the whispers from his world. Yet, because of him, she was now under a microscope, her life dissected and judged by strangers. When he visited Amber the next day, she greeted him with a wry smile, holding up a tabloid with their names plastered across the front page. "So," she said, leaning against the doorframe of her modest home, "should I be flattered or mortified?" Ethan grimaced. "I'm sorry, I didn't think." "That this would happen?" Amber interrupted, her tone light but her eyes serious. She sighed, stepping aside to let him in. "It's not your fault, Ethan. This is your world, not mine." They sat in her small living room, the cozy space a stark contrast to his sleek penthouse. A stack of children's books rested on the coffee table, and a framed photo of Amber with a group of smiling students hung on the wall. "Does it bother you?" he asked after a long silence. Amber shrugged, though her expression betrayed her unease. "It's not great, but I've dealt with worse. What about you? I'm guessing your family isn't thrilled." Ethan laughed bitterly. Thrilled is putting it mildly. Lauren thinks I'm single-handedly dismantling the Grant dynasty. Amber's lips twitched in amusement. Big words for someone who's just grabbing dinner with a teacher. Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. It's more than that, Amber. She stilled, her playful smile fading. Ethan, I'm not saying this to put pressure on you, he said quickly, meeting her eyes. But since the moment you pulled me out of that car, I've been rethinking everything. The life I've built, it feels so hollow now. And every time I'm with you, I see something I didn't know I was missing. Amber's expression softened, but there was a flicker of caution in her eyes. Ethan, my life isn't easy. The twins, my work, it's not glamorous. And the media? They're not going to let up anytime soon. I don't care about any of that, he said firmly. I care about you, about what you stand for. Amber looked at him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face as if trying to find cracks in his resolve. Finally, she smiled faintly. You're stubborn, aren't you? You have no idea. Despite her light-hearted response, the days that followed weren't easy. Amber became the subject of cruel online speculation, her background scrutinized and her character questioned. Parents at the school whispered behind her back, and some even voiced concerns to the administration. Ethan, too, faced his own storm. Lauren escalated her campaign, rallying board members to pressure him into cutting ties with Amber. At a particularly tense board meeting, one member bluntly stated, "Your personal choices are compromising our public image, Mr. Grant. This relationship is a liability." Ethan stood, his voice calm but resolute. Let me make one thing clear. Amber Johnson is not a liability. She's a reminder of what this company and I should stand for. If any of you have a problem with that, you're free to leave. The room fell silent, his words hanging heavy in the air. No one left, but the tension was palpable. Despite the mounting pressure, Ethan refused to back down. He doubled his visits to Compton, spending more time with Amber and even volunteering at her school. Together, they organized a fundraiser to renovate the playground, drawing both support and more criticism. Through it all, Amber remained a steady presence, her quiet strength anchoring Ethan as he navigated the unfamiliar terrain of public judgment and personal growth. One evening, after a long day of work and a particularly heated argument with Lauren, Ethan found himself back at Amber's home. The twins' nursery was half finished, with paint cans and brushes scattered across the floor. Amber stood in the middle of the room, a roller in hand, her belly visibly round beneath her paint-splattered t-shirt. Ethan paused in the doorway, watching her with a mix of admiration and tenderness. For the first time, he felt certain. This was where he belonged. Not in the boardroom, not in the tabloids, but here, building something real with Amber. Need some help? He asked, stepping into the room. Amber turned, her smile warm and unguarded. You're late, she teased, handing him a brush. As they worked side by side, laughter and quiet conversation filling the space, Ethan realized something. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing anything. He had already found what mattered most. The chill of winter descended on Los Angeles with an unusual ferocity, and with it came the mounting stress of Amber's pregnancy. Though her spirit remained as fierce as ever, her body bore the strain of carrying twins, coupled with the relentless challenges of her teaching job and the scrutiny surrounding her growing connection with Ethan. It happened on a Friday morning. The classroom buzzed with the laughter of children decorating their handmade snowflakes. Amber moved between tables, her hands guiding a young boy struggling with his scissors. But the edges of her vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness overtook her. Miss Johnson? One of her students asked, his small hand tugging at her sleeve. Amber smiled weakly, but before she could reassure him, her knees buckled. The classroom erupted into chaos as she collapsed to the floor. Hours later, Ethan burst into the hospital, his face pale and drawn. His driver had barely been able to keep up with him as he raced from a board meeting the moment he heard the news. Where is she? He demanded, his voice thick with urgency. A nurse directed him to Amber's room, where she lay propped up in bed, her cheeks pale but her eyes alive with relief when they met his. Ethan, she said softly. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hand reaching for hers instinctively. Amber, what happened? Are you okay? Are the babies okay? Amber squeezed his hand, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. I'm fine. The twins are fine. The doctor said I need to rest more. I've been overdoing it. You shouldn't have to do this alone, Ethan said, his voice cracking as he lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. Amber, He paused, running a hand through his hair as he searched for the right words. You scared me. I'm sorry, she said, her gaze softening. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize, he interrupted, his grip tightening on her hand. Amber, I mean it. You shouldn't be doing this alone. You don't have to. She looked away, her expression guarded. Ethan, I've been taking care of myself for a long time. This isn't your responsibility. It's not about responsibility, he said, his voice low but firm. It's about caring. I care about you, Amber. I care about the twins. More than I've ever cared about anything in my life. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she didn't pull away. Ethan, I've heard a lot of promises before. Words don't mean much unless they're backed up by actions. He leaned closer, his gaze locking onto hers. You're right, and I know I haven't been in your life long enough to earn your trust, but I want to. Because for the first time in my life, I've found something that money can't buy. A real family. Amber's breath hitched, her defenses wavering. The sincerity in Ethan's voice, the raw emotion in his eyes, it was unlike anything she'd ever seen from him before. Family, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, that's not a word I take lightly. Neither do I, he said, and I know I can't change the past or erase the mistakes I've made, but I want to be here for you, for them. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. You've shown me a life I didn't even know I wanted, Amber. Please, let me be part of it. Tears welled in Amber's eyes, but she blinked them away, unwilling to let emotion cloud her judgment. She studied him for a long moment, her heart warring with her head. Ethan, she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. I don't know what the future holds, but if you're serious about this, about us, then prove it. Not with grand gestures or promises, but with consistency, with patience. A small smile tugged at the corners of Ethan's lips. I can do that, he said. One day at a time, Amber. I'm not going anywhere. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the nurse, who came to check on Amber's vitals. As Ethan stepped aside, he glanced at the ultrasound images pinned to the wall beside her bed. Two tiny shapes floated in the black and white printouts, their delicate forms a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding their lives. He reached out, his fingers brushing one of the images. They're incredible, he murmured. Amber smiled softly, her hand resting on her belly. They're strong, she said. Just like their mother, Ethan added, his voice filled with quiet admiration. In that moment, something shifted between them. The barriers that had kept Amber guarded began to crack, and Ethan's determination to stand by her grew stronger. Winter's chill might have blanketed the world outside, but within the walls of that hospital room, a warmth blossomed, a fragile yet undeniable bond built on trust, hope, and the promise of something neither of them had expected, a future together. The sharp cry of a monitor pierced the hospital room late one evening, jolting Amber awake. Pain radiated through her body, and the weight in her belly felt alarmingly different. She gasped for breath, clutching the edges of the bed as a wave of panic surged. Something was wrong. The nurses rushed in as the alarms blared. One checked Amber's vitals while another called for the doctor. Ethan, who had stepped out to grab coffee, returned to find the scene unfolding. His heart sank at the sight of Amber, pale and trembling, her hand reaching for him. Amber? He said, his voice breaking as he dropped the coffee and ran to her side. It's happening, she whispered, tears streaking her face. The twins? It's too soon. Dr. Perez, the attending physician, arrived moments later, her face grim but steady. We need to act quickly. The babies are in distress. Amber, I'm recommending an emergency C-section. Amber nodded, her eyes filled with fear as she turned to Ethan. Stay with me, she pleaded. I'm not going anywhere, he promised, squeezing her hand as the medical team wheeled her toward the operating room. The sterile, bright lights of the OR reflected off the polished metal instruments, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Ethan was given scrubs and a mask, but barely noticed as he focused entirely on Amber. Her fingers gripped his like a lifeline, her breathing shallow as the team prepared for the surgery. Time seemed to slow, every second stretching into eternity as Ethan watched the procedure unfold. Then, at long last, the room was filled with the soft, wavering cries of two newborns. Baby a girl, the doctor announced, holding up a tiny fragile bundle before handing her to a nurse. Baby B, another girl, came the second announcement, the second cry weaker but just as miraculous. Amber sobbed softly, relief washing over her as exhaustion pulled at her consciousness. Are they okay? She asked weakly. They're early, Dr. Perez admitted, but they're fighters. We'll do everything we can. Ethan followed the nurses as they rushed the twins to the NICU, his heart pounding. The sight of Lily and Rose, so impossibly small and hooked up to countless tubes and monitors, shook him to his core. Their chests rose and fell in fragile, uneven rhythms, and he felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness. They're beautiful, he whispered, his voice breaking as he placed his hand gently against the incubator's glass. You're both so strong, just like your mom. For weeks, Ethan became a permanent fixture in the NICU. Every evening, after ensuring Amber was comfortable in her recovery room, he would sit beside the twins. He brought books to read aloud, his deep voice carrying the words of fairy tales and bedtime stories, as though his presence alone could lend them strength. He learned to recognize their tiny movements, the way Lily's fingers would when she was dreaming, or how Rose's lips puckered as if searching for something. One night, a nurse approached him with a gentle smile. Would you like to hold them? Ethan froze, his breath catching. Are they strong enough? They're ready, she assured him, carefully guiding him through the process. The moment Lily was placed in his arms, the world seemed to stop. Her tiny body fit perfectly against his chest, her warmth seeping through his shirt. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, and Ethan felt a connection so profound it left him breathless. He held Rose next, marveling at her delicate features and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her even in such a vulnerable state. Hi, sweetheart, he murmured. I'm your dad, and I'm going to make sure you never have to fight alone. Amber watched from her wheelchair the next day as Ethan held both girls, his expression a mixture of awe and determination. They adore you already, she said softly, tears shining in her eyes. They're everything, Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't think it was possible to love like this. The weeks passed, and slowly, the twins grew stronger. Their tiny hands gripped Ethan's finger during feeding times, and their cries grew louder, filling the sterile hospital room with life. Every milestone, a slightly steadier heartbeat, a few grams gained, was celebrated as a triumph. Ethan became Amber's rock during those long weeks, balancing his demanding business obligations with his newfound role as a father. He coordinated with the hospital staff, brought Amber her favorite tea from the diner, and ensured that every update on the twins' progress was relayed to her in detail. Late one night, as they sat together in the NICU, Amber turned to him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Ethan, she said, her voice hesitant but warm. I don't know how I would have made it through this without you. You're not alone anymore, he replied, his gaze steady. None of you are. In that quiet moment, amidst the soft beeping of monitors and the rhythmic breathing of their daughters, Amber and Ethan felt the foundation of something unshakable taking root. They were no longer two individuals navigating separate lives, but a family, united by love and the promise of a future worth fighting for. The first rays of dawn filtered through the hospital blinds, casting a warm glow over Ethan as he cradled Lily in his arms. She stirred slightly, her tiny fingers curling around the fabric of his shirt. On the other side of the room, Amber held Rose against her chest, humming softly. It was a moment of tranquility, yet Ethan's mind was far from quiet. For years, he had been defined by his title, tech mogul, innovator, billionaire. Yet here, in the soft hum of the NICU, he found a new identity forming, father. And it was a title that humbled him in ways he never imagined. When Lily and Rose were finally strong enough to leave the hospital, Ethan made a decision that stunned his entire team. He cleared his schedule indefinitely, delegating major projects to trusted executives. My family needs me, he told his board firmly. The declaration rippled through the corporate world, earning both criticism and admiration. Back home, Ethan transformed his sprawling mansion into a haven for his daughters. He had the nursery designed with warm, earthy tones, Amber's favorite, and filled it with books, plush toys, and handmade quilts he insisted on ordering from local artisans. Every detail was carefully chosen, reflecting a man determined to create a space filled with love and comfort. But fatherhood wasn't without its challenges. Ethan, who once navigated billion-dollar deals with ease, now found himself grappling with sleepless nights, diaper changes, and the heart-pounding panic of the twins' first colds. One memorable evening, Amber found him in the nursery, pacing with a wailing rose in one arm while awkwardly preparing a bottle with the other. "You're overthinking it," Amber teased, taking the bottle from him with a laugh. "Parenthood isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, and you're doing an amazing job." Her words stayed with him. They became his mantra during the chaotic early months, a constant reminder that love mattered more than expertise. Inspired by Amber's unwavering passion for her students, Ethan began to see his world through a new lens. Late one night, as they sat on the couch with Lily and Rose asleep between them, Amber spoke about her dreams for the community. "There's so much untapped potential here," she said, her voice tinged with both hope and frustration. "Kids like mine deserve opportunities, but the system is broken." Ethan listened intently, her words planting a seed in his mind. The next morning, he brought her coffee and a sketch pad. "Tell me everything," he said, handing her a pen. Together, they mapped out an ambitious plan, a network of programs aimed at leveling the playing field for children in underserved communities. The initiative would include scholarships, after-school programs, and state-of-the-art technology labs designed to spark creativity and innovation. Launching the project was no small feat. Ethan's name brought immediate attention, and with it, scrutiny. Headlines speculated about his motives, calling it a PR move to rehabilitate his image. His sister Lauren was especially vocal, accusing him of recklessly tying the family name to a cause she deemed too controversial. Ethan faced the criticism with a calm he didn't know he possessed. "This isn't about appearances," he told Lauren during a tense phone call. "It's about doing what's right, for Amber, for our daughters, and for kids who deserve a chance." Amber stood beside him every step of the way, balancing her teaching with her newfound role as a community advocate. Watching her lead workshops and mentor young educators filled Ethan with awe. She was a force of nature, and he was proud to support her vision. Meanwhile, Ethan discovered unexpected joy in the simplest moments of fatherhood. Lily's first giggle, the way Rose's eyes lit up when he sang off-key lullabies, the quiet evenings spent reading to them as they drifted to sleep. These were the riches he had unknowingly sought all his life. Months passed, and the educational initiative began to bear fruit. One evening, Amber and Ethan attended the opening of a new community center they had funded together. The space buzzed with excitement, filled with children exploring books, robotics kits, and art supplies. As they stood in the midst of the vibrant scene, a young girl approached them hesitantly. "Thank you," she said, clutching a new notebook. "I've never had one like this before." Amber knelt to the girl's level, her eyes shining. "You're going to do great things," she said warmly. Ethan watched the interaction, his heart swelling with pride. Turning to Amber, he said softly, This is what matters. Not the headlines, not the criticism, just this." That night, as they returned home to their sleeping daughters, Ethan realized how much he had changed. The man who once measured success in numbers and accolades now found fulfillment in the laughter of his children and the impact of their shared efforts. "I never imagined life could be this full," he confessed to Amber as they stood in the nursery, watching Lily and Rose dream peacefully. Amber smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "That's because you finally learned what it means to truly live." In embracing fatherhood, Ethan had discovered a wealth far greater than anything he had ever built in the corporate world, a legacy of love, compassion, and hope that would endure for generations. The first year of Lily and Rose's lives was a whirlwind of challenges and triumphs. From sleepless nights and endless doctor visits to the first smiles, giggles, and wobbly attempts to crawl, every moment etched itself into Ethan and Amber's hearts. The twins, once fragile in the NICU, had blossomed into lively, curious little girls who filled their home with laughter. For Ethan, the transformation was profound. The man who once thrived on meticulous schedules and high-stakes negotiations now found himself on the floor, building block towers or singing nursery rhymes, often off-key. It wasn't always easy. Balancing work, fatherhood, and the demands of their community projects left him exhausted. Yet, for the first time in his life, he felt truly fulfilled. Amber's resilience remained an anchor for their growing family. She returned to teaching part-time, her passion for education as vibrant as ever. Her former students often stopped by to visit, some even volunteering at the community centers she and Ethan had established. Amber's influence extended beyond her classroom, inspiring countless young people to believe in themselves. The bond between Ethan and Amber deepened with each shared milestone. They became partners in every sense, supporting each other through the highs and lows. Ethan marveled at Amber's strength and grace, while she admired his willingness to embrace change and prioritize what truly mattered. When the twins' first birthday approached, Amber suggested hosting a celebration not just for their family, but for the community that had supported them. "It's not just our victory," she explained one evening as they planned the event. "It's a testament to what love and perseverance can achieve, even in the face of overwhelming odds." The celebration took place in the courtyard of the newest community center, a vibrant space that had quickly become a beacon of hope for local families. Colorful balloons and streamers adorned the area, and the air buzzed with laughter and music. Children ran about, clutching cupcakes and party hats, while parents shared stories of resilience and gratitude. Amber and Ethan stood near the stage, each holding one of their daughters. Lily clung to Ethan's shoulder, her tiny fingers exploring his tie, while Rose gazed wide-eyed at the lively crowd. Ethan felt a swell of pride as he looked out at the gathering, a symbol of the life they had built together. The highlight of the evening came when a young woman stepped onto the stage. Her name was Maria, a former student of Amber's who had overcome significant challenges to earn a college scholarship. Maria carried a small notebook and a confident smile. "Good evening," Maria began, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I've been given the honor of sharing something very special tonight. It's an essay I wrote about love and how it has the power to break barriers." Amber's grip on Ethan's hand tightened as Maria began to read. Her words were raw and heartfelt, weaving a story of struggle, sacrifice, and the enduring strength of human connection. She spoke of Amber's impact as a teacher, of Ethan's dedication to the community, and of the twins as a symbol of hope and new beginnings. "There are times when society tells us what is and isn't possible," Maria concluded, her voice trembling slightly. "But families like Amber and Ethan's remind us that love doesn't conform to expectations. It transcends them. It breaks through walls and lights a path forward for all of us." As Maria finished, the courtyard erupted into applause. Amber wiped tears from her cheeks, her heart full. Ethan, too, found himself overcome with emotion. He looked down at Lily, who was now fast asleep against his chest, and at Rose, who reached out toward Maria as if understanding the significance of her words. After the applause died down, Ethan stepped forward, still holding Lily. "I've built many things in my life," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "But nothing compares to the family I've built with Amber and these two incredible little girls. They've taught me that true success isn't about wealth or power. It's about the lives we touch and the love we share." Amber joined him, placing a hand on his arm. "This isn't just our story," she added, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "It's all of yours, too. Together, we've shown that when we support one another, there's nothing we can't overcome." As the evening drew to a close, the twins were showered with love and gifts from the community. They giggled as Amber and Ethan helped them unwrap colorful packages, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. Later that night, after the girls had been tucked into bed, Ethan and Amber sat together on the balcony of their home, gazing out at the city lights. "Do you think they'll remember any of this?" Ethan asked, his arm draped around Amber's shoulders. "They'll feel it," Amber replied, her voice soft. "Even if they don't remember the details, they'll grow up knowing they were surrounded by love, hope, and people who believed in them." Ethan nodded, his heart full. In the face of societal expectations, personal trials, and countless challenges, they had created something extraordinary. A family defined not by convention, but by the bonds of love and resilience. The warmth of spring had painted the city in hues of renewal. Trees bloomed in soft pinks and whites, their petals fluttering like tiny blessings in the gentle breeze. The courtyard of the community center was alive with laughter and chatter, a reflection of everything Amber and Ethan had worked so hard to nurture. For this evening, however, Ethan had planned something deeply personal, something that would forever mark the journey they had traveled together. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the cityscape, Ethan found himself holding Lily while Rose toddled unsteadily toward Amber, who knelt with open arms. The sight warmed his heart. Amber, radiant in her simplicity, was the anchor of this world he had come to cherish. They had gathered at the community center not for a grand event, but a quiet celebration. A barbecue with close friends, family, and a few members of the community who had been instrumental in their journey. Amber's mother sat nearby, laughing as she balanced a sleepy Rose on her lap, while Ethan's sister Lauren was helping grill burgers. Their relationship had thawed since Lauren had witnessed firsthand the sincerity of Ethan's transformation. As twilight deepened, the casual chatter faded into the background of Ethan's thoughts. Tonight was the night. In his pocket was the ring he had spent months finding, not the largest or most expensive, but one that symbolized the life they had built together. A vintage design with a modest diamond set in rose gold, it reminded him of Amber's timeless grace and strength. "Amber," Ethan said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion as he approached her near the garden. She was crouched beside Lily, tying the little girl's shoe, and looked up with a curious smile. "Hmm?" she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Ethan knelt beside her, shifting Lily into one arm as he reached into his pocket with the other. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. "There was a time when I thought legacy meant building empires," he began, his voice filled with conviction. "I thought it was about power, control, and leaving behind something that would stand the test of time. But I was wrong." Amber's eyes softened as she listened, her gaze flicking between his face and the glimmering box he now held in his hand. "You showed me a different kind of legacy," Ethan continued. "One built on love, resilience, and the kind of strength that doesn't crumble under pressure. You've given me a family, Amber, a real family. And with Lily and Rose, I've come to understand that this is what matters most. This is what I want my life to be about." He opened the box, revealing the ring, its delicate brilliance catching the last rays of sunlight. "I know I don't have all the answers, and I know life will throw challenges our way. But there's no one else I'd rather face them with. Amber, will you marry me?" Amber's breath caught, her hand instinctively flying to her mouth. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she stared at the man before her. The same man she had pulled from a burning car, who had once been consumed by power but now knelt before her with nothing but love in his heart. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Then louder, "Yes, Ethan, 1,000 times yes." The courtyard erupted into cheers as the gathered friends and family realized what had happened. Amber's mother clapped her hands in delight, while Lauren wiped a discreet tear from her cheek. Lily, oblivious to the significance of the moment, clapped her tiny hands together and squealed in delight, while Rose toddled over to grab at Ethan's sleeve. Ethan slid the ring onto Amber's finger, his hands trembling slightly. When he rose to embrace her, the twins wiggled their way into the hug, their giggles filling the air. In the days that followed, news of their engagement spread quickly, but for the first time, Ethan didn't care about public perception. The tabloids could speculate all they wanted. His life was no longer about the approval of strangers. The wedding, held a few months later, was an intimate affair. Amber and Ethan chose to marry in the very garden where he had proposed, surrounded by the community that had become their extended family. The twins served as flower girls, dressed in matching dresses of pale yellow, scattering petals with gleeful abandon. As Ethan and Amber exchanged vows beneath a canopy of blossoms, their words were simple but profound. They promised to love, to grow, and to face life's uncertainties together. After the ceremony, the celebration continued well into the night. Amber's students performed a song they had written for the occasion, while Ethan surprised everyone by taking the stage to deliver a heartfelt toast. "To my wife," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "To the woman who saved my life in every way imaginable. To our daughters, who've shown me the beauty of unconditional love. And to all of you, who've reminded me that a legacy isn't built with wealth, it's built with moments like these." The applause was thunderous, but Ethan's focus was solely on Amber, who smiled at him with the same unshakable confidence that had first drawn him to her. As the night ended, Ethan stood on the balcony of their home, holding Lily, while Amber rocked a drowsy Rose in her arms. The city stretched out before them, a sea of lights, but it no longer held the allure it once had. His world was here, in the warmth of Amber's smile, the laughter of their children, and the quiet, unshakable bond they shared. "This is the legacy I was meant to leave," Ethan murmured, pressing a kiss to Lily's forehead. "And it's better than anything I ever imagined." Amber leaned against him, her hand entwined with his. "It's ours," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet contentment. "And that's all that matters." Together, they stood under the stars, ready to embrace whatever the future held, united by love, strengthened by resilience, and anchored by the family they had built. In a world where power and prestige once defined success, Ethan found a different path, one of love and unbreakable connections. No longer the man of towering empires and billion-dollar deals, he became a father, a husband, and more importantly, a man who learned to cherish the simple, invaluable things life had to offer. When standing at a crossroads, sometimes we find ourselves not through triumph, but through failure, through moments of vulnerability, and through events that seem insignificant, yet change our lives completely. It was these challenges that, instead of breaking him, shaped Ethan into the man he was meant to become, a man strong in love and responsibility. In the end, Ethan no longer measured success by the wealth in his bank account or the power in his hands. He measured it by the laughter of his children, by the quiet nights spent with family, and by the warmth that love brings. That was the true legacy he wanted to leave, a family, a life rich in meaning and happiness that he had never dared to dream of before. And when life gave him the greatest gift, Ethan realized that nothing could compare to what he had found: family. A family that, despite all the hardships, remains strong and enduring through time. For in love, there is something more valuable than anything else: the choices we make, the trust we share, and the unwavering belief that the best things will come when we dare to love, dare to live, and dare to change. And so their story continued, not with an ending, but with a new journey, full of hope and love. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. Your support means the world to us, and we hope you enjoyed the content as much as we enjoyed creating it. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends and family. Every like, share, and subscription helps us grow and continue bringing you more amazing content. Your feedback is invaluable. So feel free to leave a comment below to let us know what you think or what you'd like to see next. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for being a part of this journey. Stay tuned for more exciting videos, and we'll see you in the next one.